In this video, I'm going to show you how to make your own LED uplighting. I made mine specifically for a barn wedding, but it's perfect for any event or space that could use ambient indirect light. So you'll need thermal glue, super glue, a 12-volt female adapter, soldering tin, as well as a soldering iron, and the 30mm heatsink, as well as a 30mm 12-volt fan. With that, you'll need wire strippers and cutters. I have two versions here, the standard squeeze type and then the fancier ones. So you'll start with the 10-volt amber LED, and you can see it's metal on one side, and then on the front you'll see a positive and negative leads. So start by bending up the leads towards the top. This will give us more room to work with the wires. Then we'll take our 30mm heatsink, and we're going to be using the thermal glue to attach the LED chip. The thermal glue will serve two purposes. It will form a bond between the LED chip and the heatsink, but it also is highly conductive, so it'll allow the heat to transfer into the heatsink. The trick is these LED chips will overheat within seconds if they're not properly, if the heat isn't properly taken away. So apply the thermal glue to the heatsink, and they're going to press down until the thermal glue starts to come through the holes on the top of the chip. And you want to look around the entire edge and make sure that you see glue coming out of every piece. So if you don't see it coming out on every edge, go ahead and squeeze it down and help it spread out. So once it pops up and you see it on each side, you're good. So while that dries, take your 30mm 12-volt fan, and we're going to cut the end of it and remove the connector. And then we're going to move on to gluing the heatsink to the fan. So just a little bit of super glue right on the heatsink and this on the fan. The sticker side of the fan is where the air blows. If you don't have a sticker on yours, make sure you plug it into a 12-volt supply so you know that the fan is blowing towards the heatsink. Let that set up, and we'll be ready to move on. So next you'll need standoffs. I bought a full kit here, but I believe I'm looking for a M3 standoff. And you can use any size you like. And this will act as the legs to give the fan room to breathe. So we'll take the M3 standoffs, and we're going to be screwing it into each hole on the bottom of the fan. Again, if your fan varies, you'll want to measure and find the right piece to go in there. But once you have the right size, go ahead and use super glue to hold it in place. Now, if you wanted to skip this part of it, you could also use just a standard bolt or screw. The end goal is the fan's going to be pulling air up from the bottom, so it just needs to have around a ½ inch or so it can pull in cool air to cool off the heatsink. If you aren't able to keep the heatsink cooled enough, you'll notice the light start to flicker, and then some of the actual elements inside the LED will start to burn out. So let the super glue dry, and we'll be able to move on to connecting the wiring. So take a spare piece of low voltage 12-volt wire. I believe this is just like a hookup wire is what it's called a lot of times. There's only going to be about 1 amp of current running, so really any size wire will work. It doesn't have to be anything too hefty. So go ahead and strip the ends and twist them up, and then we're going to be applying solder. Now this is just to give these leads will be attaching to the LED chip itself, so it's easier to go ahead and get the solder on the ends of each of the wires, so when you go to connect it, it'll automatically connect. If you don't have a soldering iron or you don't want to solder, You could also potentially wrap the wire through the positive and negative leads on the LED itself, but to be safe, it's better to go ahead and solder it so it doesn't come disconnected. So as you can see on the metal, there's on the right there's the positive mark, and then on the left is a negative mark. So the red will always be positive and black will always be negative. So we're going to go ahead and try to solder the wire right on that lead where there's a little hole. And if you get it just right, the solder should leak through that hole and harden. Once connected, you should be able to tug it a little bit and it should stay connected, and then you know you have a good connection. And then do the same for the negative side. And always be sure to reference the plus and negative sign on the LED itself to make sure you're connecting up the right polarity. Once connected, you can go ahead and start testing the light. So we'll go ahead and pull both leads together, and then we're going to cut it in the same spot so they're each the same length. You can do this with scissors or your wire strippers. Or in this case, both wire strippers, if yours are dull like mine. So then we'll split the wires, and then we'll go ahead and expose the tips of each of them. And they will be connecting red to red, black to black. And then again, we'll be adding a small amount of solder just to make sure they stay connected. Now when applying the solder to these leads, you want to not overdo it. If you're going to be using the female 12-volt adapter, they are limited in size, so you want to add just enough to hold it together. And we have a good connection. So now if you want to use just a standard 12-volt plug from the wall, you'll need a female adapter. So what you do, we'll go ahead and open up each of the ends, and then it'll be positive and negative. So, and as you remember, red is always positive, black's always negative. So open them up all the way, and then we'll be shoving the ends into that. Now, if you're hooking up multiple of these in a row, it may be better to connect them all in line using some quick connectors, or even soldering the lines together. In my case, I had about 5 or 6 together, and they were all wired using a single 12-volt power supply and quick connectors to using a connector for positive, a connector for negative, and so I could use one main power line and then connect each light off of it. So for the 12 volt, it'll look just like that. And then if you're using more than one, most 12 volt plugs from the wall can only do 1 to 2 amps. And this light and fan will pull just over 1 amp. So with a 12 volt power supply, you can go ahead and connect as many as you want. Just keep in mind that each light will pull around 1 amp. And you can tell, look at the side or look at the owner's manual of your power supply, and you should be able to tell how many amps it can do. So there we go. You have your light. It's extremely bright, especially when the other lights are off, and it will be able to run for hours on end and keep itself cool. Hope you guys enjoy.